Hi guys, this is Kevin for Pixovert.com. In this video, we are going to be taking a look at two software apps for raw image editing. We're going to be looking at Adobe Lightroom Classic, and we're also going to be looking at Darktable. Both apps are pretty mature image editing apps that allow you to edit your raw images straight from camera, and you can get pretty decent results using either package. Lightroom is a package which comes either individually or as part of the Adobe Creative Cloud. It's basically a piece of rented software that you can rent either monthly or annually. Darktable, on the other hand, is free, open source, and you can install it on as many PCs as you want. Lightroom can be installed on Windows and Mac. Darktable can be installed on pretty much most modern operating systems. We're going to start off in Lightroom, which is the older software. Here we can see the library panel, which is where you normally open up. You've got the navigator on the left, the catalog. The catalogs are what Lightroom uses to store and organize your work. Catalogs can become very large, containing thousands or tens of thousands of images. We've got folders and collections which allow you to navigate on your computer. And we've got the publishing services that allow you to navigate your computer or even on the web. On the right hand side, we've got the histogram, we've got the quick develop module, which allows us to make basic adjustments to images, either individually or a whole collection of images. We've got keywording and metadata and other stuff down in the bottom right hand corner. One of the strengths of Lightroom is that it allows you to use artificial intelligence, Adobe Sensei, to do facial recognition, so you can automatically tag your images, and that's something that will probably be very useful for portrait photographers. Right at the top here, we've got some filters, so we can, for instance, filter by metadata, including lens, camera, date. This is very useful. We can go to attributes, and we can here filter by your edits, whether or not you've edited an image, the rating you've given the image, and we can even do filtering by text. So this is very, very powerful. We go next to the develop module, and you'll notice here that there are other modules, the map, book, slideshow, print, and web modules. I'm not going to spend too much time on these. I think most of them are pretty self-explanatory. The map module is one that allows you to map images according to location, so it uses GPS. Inside the develop module is where we do most of the work. We've got the navigator window. Underneath it, we've got the presets, and just take a look at this. We can go to the presets, just hover, and you can see what changes the presets would bring. That's really powerful. If we close up the presets, you can purchase presets, you can create your own, you can download some for free. There's a snapshot which allows us to keep different versions of our image editing, and also there's the history, which can become quite long. We've also got the collections down here. Collections are just basically another way that Lightroom uses to organize the work. There's the all-important histogram, which can be used to edit the image. We've got tools which can be used to do things like correction of censor spots, or if you've got someone here who has some imperfections, you can go ahead and just edit out those imperfections using the spot remove tool. There are plenty of tools here that allow you to do different tasks for different types of image. So you've got the graduated filter and all sorts of other tools that allow you to edit your image here. Things are generally organized very, very logically, and the software is pretty intuitive to use. Here we've got the basic panel. Then we have the detail panel, which deals with sharpening. We've got another panel for color, lens correction, which sometimes works well, sometimes not so well. We've got the transformation, which allows us to correct images, perspective, and so on in situations where that needs to be done, especially for landscape, architecture, and that kind of thing. You can do it manually here. The effects menu allows us to add effects like vignetting. There's a calibration menu. This panel allows us to do global color changes. And obviously then there's the tone curve. Notice that you can use the tone curve to do color edits as well as to change the luminance tones. Then there's the split toning, which can be used to apply a different type of special effect, as I've done with this image here. Now, one thing to note is that if you are using Darktable and Lightroom, you pretty much are not going to end up with the same results. If you're editing the same image, you're going to end up with different results. Almost always, it's impossible to get exactly the same result. That's something to bear in mind if you wanted to experiment with these packages. Let's close this up and let's go back to our snapshot. Let's take a look at the basic panel, which is probably the most important one. This is very well organized. You've got the temperature, then we've got the tone. You can auto-tone an image, which sometimes works, sometimes is horrible. And we can also change exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites and blacks. This is something that Adobe have worked on for quite some time. And generally speaking, I find that it does tend to be a very powerful way of editing images that have a high dynamic range. We've got the clarity, vibrance and saturation sliders here. Again, these are very easy to use. You don't need to be a genius to figure things out. The detail panel allows us to do sharpening and noise reduction. Again, noise reduction is pretty simple. Generally speaking, it's pretty easy to get the results that you want. I wouldn't say the sharpening and noise reduction are necessarily the best, but if you've used the noise reduction and sharpening inside of Adobe Camera Raw, they're pretty much identical. The color adjustments are pretty simple, but very, very useful. Lens correction can be done using automatic profiles, built-in profiles, or you can do your own manual changes. And that's basically the introduction to the develop panel inside of Lightroom. A couple of other things to demonstrate is that it's very, very easy to do it before and after. You can do it using different configurations. This is one feature that I really like about Lightroom. We've got plenty more features that are available inside this software. It's very simple, very easy to get going with. You can also do some video editing, but what I want to demonstrate for this video is if you're working with multiple images, you can do things like photo merge, which gives you access to a very good HDR panel. This allows you to do HDR, proper HDR, using bracketed shots. You can do panorama and you can do HDR panoramas. These are features that Adobe have worked on for quite some time, and they have matured into very useful features inside of Lightroom. There's also enhanced detail, which is a newer feature that allows you to do a different type of demosaicing. I've got mixed feelings about enhanced details. It is fairly new, and I would assume that it's going to improve as time goes by. Like I say, there are a lot of other features, but we're just doing an introduction. So we're now going to turn our attention to Darktable. Inside of Darktable, you open up using Lighttable. This is the file management module inside of Darktable. The other modules are Darkroom, which is used for developing, and then we've got a couple of others: Map, Slideshow, and Tethering. Both Darktable and Lightroom allow you to tether a camera and to capture images that way. On the right hand side, we've got the import panel. Collect images is where we filter images. So we can filter images by camera, the folder, what Darktable calls the film roll, which is basically collections that you've created. We've got things like ISO, focal length, aperture, exposure. This is very useful for organizing your work. Then we've got the recently used collections and the image information. On the right hand side, we've got a bunch of features that allow us to do basic edits. This includes the styles, which are very similar to the presets inside of Lightroom. I don't think the styles are as powerful as the presets inside of Lightroom. When we edit an image, we go into Darkroom, and this is where we've got the history, duplicate manager, color on the left. The navigator allows us to view the image at different resolutions and to navigate our way around the image. Or you can use the mouse wheel, just click on the mouse wheel to navigate in and out of the image. On the right hand side, we've got a bunch of panels which are far more complicated and far less intuitive than the ones inside of Lightroom. So we have here the edits that I've made, and we can see with the history panel, we started off with the base curve already applied. We denoised the image, changed the exposure, lens correction, equalizer. Now, some of these will not make sense to you until you've read the manual and really understand the software. So it's nowhere near as intuitive as Lightroom. For instance, equalizer is the panel that I use to do sharpening and also noise reduction. Most of the noise reduction inside of the image. This image did not need a lot of noise reduction or sharpening, therefore it's not very effective. But you can see here how it works. We've got luma and chroma, and we can go around and do sharpening, and we can do noise reduction. We can also blend using a bunch of options, including masking. The masking features are really powerful. For instance, we can mask according to a drawn mask, or we can use what's known as a parametric mask. So we can go ahead and choose parametric. This allows us to use these sliders to determine what is affected and what is not affected inside of the image. This is very powerful and is one of the features that makes Darktable pretty different from Lightroom. We can also duplicate the panels and apply them more than once using different features and different settings. My general impression with Darktable was that it was not quite as good as Lightroom in dealing with contrast and with detail, but it generally tended to be better than Lightroom at giving you options to edit the colors inside the image. If we look at the demosaic, you can see that this is always turned on, and there are different options for demosaicing. I did find that you got very different demosaicing results when you were working with different cameras inside of Darktable and inside of Lightroom. Sometimes Lightroom's demosaicing was superior, sometimes Darktable's demosaicing was superior, and it tended to depend on the camera. Another feature which stood out to me was that the exposure option inside of Darktable allows you to correct exposure by 3 stops, which is a lot less than the exposure correction that you can do inside of Lightroom. Inside of Lightroom, we've got 5 stops on the upside and 5 stops on the downside. Here we're just limited to 3 stops on the upside and 3 on the downside. And looking just underneath the histogram, we've got an option where we can store our favorite panels. There are so many panels inside of Darktable that you may want to store your favorite ones for easy access using the star that you can place against every single panel. We've got a basic group that allows us to change things like contrast, brightness and saturation, shadows and highlights, and things like crop and rotate. When we move to the next tab, which is called the tone group, we've got things like the tone curve and the zone system. There's another new filter, there's another new panel called Filmic, which gives us a very different way of working. And it's suggested that you may be able to work with this panel. It's suggested that you may be able to do most of your edits using just this panel rather than all the other edits that we've got in our history here. So if I wanted to use the Filmic, I might go back, let's say, to sharpen, and then I could turn on the Filmic module, and I could then go ahead and do some edits using just the Filmic module. I don't like that it looks very different inside of the Filmic module than it would have done inside of the camera, but it is apparently something that might be better at producing the desired results than the traditional method. I'm going to undo the edits and we're going to go back to the traditional method. There's a color group here which allows us to edit color. This is a very powerful feature inside of Darktable. And then we have our sharpening using equalizer, we've got denoising, defringing, another set of features that are very good inside of Darktable, but nowhere near as easy to use as Lightroom's features. Finally, we've got some special effects like vignetting and grain. So you can tell that there's a lot that these two packages have in common, and there's also a lot of differences between them. One area where I found a very significant difference between Darktable and Lightroom was how they handled exposure. I've already mentioned that Darktable is limited to 3 stops of exposure correction, whilst Lightroom goes all the way up to 5 stops. Darktable tended to have difficulty dealing with shadows and detail inside of shadows. So if we open up this image here and just zoom into this area of shadow, you can tell there's quite a lot of color noise and some luminance noise there. This is very difficult to get rid of without applying some kind of masking inside of Darktable. Same image inside of Lightroom. If we go to the problem area, you can tell that there is no color noise there. We've eliminated all of the color noise, and we did that using the details tab, and the color noise reduction was turned up to 80. If I turn it down again, you can see that same color noise that we have in Darktable. But even if I turn down the luminance noise reduction, the image only begins to look about as bad as the image inside of Darktable. From the outset, I felt with this particular image that it looked better in Lightroom compared to Darktable. With the noise reduction applied, Lightroom, to my mind, looks miles better than Darktable, and I found that this was generally the case, that Darktable did not work very well with underexposed areas, and that shadow recovery was more painful inside of Darktable than inside of Lightroom. It was much easier to see the noise coming back when you try to sharpen an image after having done some noise reduction inside of Darktable, whereas inside of Lightroom you could sharpen an image and just mask away any increase in the amount of noise that you were getting. So I did feel in that one area that Lightroom was significantly superior to Darktable. Another feature that I felt that Darktable was lacking on was its ability to demosaic. So as we move through this image, you can tell it takes a couple of seconds before the image resolves whenever I move things around. Inside of Lightroom, things are a lot easier. I'm not sure how or whether it is possible to speed things up inside of Darktable, but this is one of those things that would definitely tend to nudge me more towards Lightroom than to Darktable. Overall then, I think the two packages are aimed at two very different types of people. Darktable is very good for people who don't mind spending a bit of time learning about the incredible features inside of the software, and who don't mind learning how to use the more sophisticated features, for instance the blend modes and the masking options. I didn't find that I was always able to get the results that I wanted out of Darktable, but I think in a well exposed image, most of the time it should be possible to get a pretty decent result using Darktable. Lightroom is more suited, I think, to the professional photographer who likes to take lots of images, does not have a lot of time to spend in front of the computer, doesn't want to spend too much time learning the software, and who wants to edit images quickly using perhaps even some of the presets that are available for Lightroom. I think it's easier to get started inside of Lightroom, and I think with some types of images you will get superior results with Lightroom. With certain types of images you will get superior results with Darktable, and it's a question of figuring out which software is working well for you with your camera and your style of photography. Finally, when it comes to the cost, I think some people will be definitely put off by the $120 plus subscriptions model that applies for Adobe Lightroom. I think some very keen, talented amateur photographers who would want to use Lightroom might prefer to use Darktable because it is so much easier and less taxing with the open source license. That is going to be it for this one. I hope you guys found that useful. If you did, hit the like button and subscribe for more videos. I will see you later. Bye.